Coming up on Network Africa, Al-Qaeda claims responsibility for the death of 14 soldiers in the center of Mali. Ethiopia says regional forces have started withdrawing from Tigray province. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and his Kenyan counterpart William Ruto discuss food security and Ukraine grain initiative. Thanks a lot for joining us on Network Africa today. I'm Anne Nwawadu. Al-Qaeda has claimed responsibility for an attack that saw at least 14 soldiers killed and 11 others injured in central Mali. The statements by the Malian army claim to have neutralized 31 terrorists. According to a press release, the jihadists of the Support Group for Islam and Muslims affiliated with Al-Qaeda, for their part, claimed responsibility for a double ambush, having targeted Malian soldiers and mercenaries from Wenge group in the region of Mopti. Mali has suffered since 2012 from the spread of the jihadist movement and a deep multidimensional political, economic and humanitarian crisis. The center of the country is one of the hotbeds of violence which has spread to neighboring countries, Burkina Faso and Niger, and is now spreading towards the south. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with his Kenyan counterpart William Ruto. In a tweet, the Ukrainian president said they discussed food security and the Ukraine Grain Initiative, a humanitarian program to help get Ukrainian grain to countries with acute food shortages. Mr. Zelensky said they also spoke about the creation of grain hubs in Africa and even agreed to enhance cooperation between both countries. The Ukrainian president also thanked Kenya for its support and constructive cooperation in the United Nations amid the war in his country that began after the Russia invasion in February last year. The Kenyan presidency has not issued any statement regarding Thursday's talks. Kenya made its opposition to the Russian invasion in the speech at the United Nations Security Council soon after the war began. In September last year, Mr. Ruto said he was committed to playing a leading collaborative role at the global level in solving the crisis in Ukraine. And we now have Cyrus Ombati, he's a Kenyan journalist in Nairobi. Thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. What is it like to have a president of Ukraine talking about food security and collaboration in Africa? I mean, the Ukraine grain is projected to be brought to Kenya. What do you make of that discussion?
Well, to us, most of us in Kenya, it seemed to be more of a political statement from Ukraine than the food security issue. Because you see, Kenya has been trying to India to be kind of neutral in as much as the last regime condemned Russia for invading Ukraine. But since Mr. Ruto took over, we have seen some of a shifting of some political stand now because as you put it very clearly, Ruto has not spoken, or rather said he spoke to Mr. Zelensky. So that tells you that it's more of a political statement rather than being a food security issue.
All right, so talking about food security, why do you actually think this is just a political statement? Is there no shortage of grains in Kenya as we speak? Can you tell us anything about the grain hubs right there and when they are to be established, or what you think this discussion is really geared towards?
It's true we have food shortage in Kenya. Like now, the government has allowed the importation of maize, which is zero-rated, duty-free, as a form of mitigating the issue of hunger and drought in the country. Creating the grain hub in Kenya and the region would be a good idea, but now, you see, Africa is you can say it's a green kind of world or other part of the world. You can be able to address the food security issue, but now because of the poor leadership and the greediness, we are in this situation of hunger and drought. It shows the lack of planning. It's a mockery on us as Africa, as a region. But then we have no option because Ukraine is more, in as much as they are battered by the war, they are showing that they have a surplus to give Africa, which can be in a way accepted. Ukraine has given food to places like Ethiopia, which is also another country which
All right.
to stand on its own.
Okay. All right, Cyrus, let's just say this is not a political statement and it's probably going to happen real. How much succor do you think the Ukraine grain will bring to Kenya if this eventually happens?
I believe there's a vessel which they have been talking about, which left Ukraine sometimes back, heading to this region. I believe in a short while there will be tons of maize or other grain being offloaded at the port of Mombasa. That's where we're waiting. They have been talking about it coming. So it's an issue of time when. It's an issue of time when it should be coming. Anytime we're expecting that.
Do you think, why has the Kenyan presidency not issued any statement regarding the talks on Thursday with the Ukrainian president? Do you have any idea why?
Well, that's a question because it's always a very fast to issue a statement, but rather to tweet or put it on his Facebook account talking about such conversations. But everyone is wondering why. And that's why we believe it's all political because Kenya, since Ruto took over, has been trying also to be a kind of neutral, embracing Russia in one way or the other. Remember, even when Mr. Ruto was declared the president, Russia was among the first countries to congratulate him, even before other countries that actually come in on board to say thank you, congratulations. So I think he's trying also to play a political game in a way. It's a geopolitical issue. Regionally, apart from South Africa and maybe Uganda, which are trying to support Russia in one way, many countries don't support Russia in many ways.
All right. Thank you very much, Cyrus Ombati. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed to know if that is a political statement or if it will eventually happen. Thank you for your time on Network Africa.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you so much.
To other stories now, Sudanese military ruler Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the South Sudan's President Salva Kiir have agreed to set up a joint force to secure their two countries' 1,800-kilometer border. According to Sudan state-owned media, the agreement was announced following talks between both leaders in South Sudan's capital, Juba, on Thursday. A statement said the foreign ministers of both countries also attended the talks. It adds that General Burhan and Mr. Kiir also discussed the disputed Abyei region, calling for regular joint meetings to resolve the dispute over the territory. Mr. Kiir also briefed Mr. Burhan on the implementation of the 2018 South Sudan peace agreement, of which Sudan is one of the main guarantors. Ethiopia's defense forces, members of the Amhara Special Forces, have started withdrawing from the Tigrayan city of Shire and its environs. Amhara Special Forces were allies with the federal government during the two-year civil war against fighters from Tigray. And this is coming as Tigrayan fighters earlier this week began handing over their weapons in line with a peace agreement signed in November in Pretoria, South Africa, to end the brutal war. Tigrayan forces have been demanding the withdrawal of forces from Amhara and neighboring Eritrea from that region. A send-off ceremony was also held for the forces, attended by the Army's Deputy Chief of Staff, General Abebo Tedesi. There is, however, no indication if Eritrean troops will also follow. The French and German foreign ministers say there can be no reconciliation in Ethiopia without justice. They were speaking in Addis Ababa after meeting Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to discuss the progress of November's peace deal between the federal government and Tigrayan rebels. The ministers called for the establishment of a transitional justice mechanism to help push abuses committed during the conflict. The ministers also say they hope to visit parts of Ethiopia in the future where the question of accountability played a big role. Ethiopia's foreign minister, Demeke, also promised that the government will ensure crimes do not go unpunished, and he told journalists that Ethiopia had asked for UN Human Rights Office and the government-appointed Rights Commission to deploy monitors to war-affected areas. Gabonese President Ali Bongo Ondimba has met with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang in Libreville, the Gabonese capital, on boosting bilateral ties. Qin noted that China and Gabon firmly support each other on issues concerning core interests and major concerns of both countries and upholding international fairness and justice. Wayne also explained the essential requirements and characteristics of Chinese modernization, stressing that China will continue to support Gabon on jointly building the Belt and Road Initiative with high quality and helping Gabon advance the strategic plan for an emerging Gabon to realize a win-win cooperation and a common development for the two countries. The Gabonese president, on his part, expressed willingness of deepening cooperation with China and creating more benefit for the people of both countries. But during this visit, Qin also held talks with Gabonese Foreign Minister Michael Musa Damo. The two sides agreed to continue mutual support, tap potentials, and achieve more highlights in their cooperation. The judgment has been reserved for January 16th on the urgent interdict application brought by South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa. That's against a private prosecution matter meant to be heard on the 19th of January. The private prosecution is being brought on by President Ramaphosa's predecessor, Jacob Zuma, who accuses him of doing nothing when he complained about the alleged leak of his private medical records by the state prosecutor, Billy Downer, and a journalist covering Mr. Zuma's corruption trial.
And so begins this epic battle between the ex-president and the incumbent. President Cyril Ramaphosa has brought an application for an interdict against his predecessor, who has summoned him to a court case accusing him of being an accessory after the fact in a case where he accused the state prosecutor in his corruption case of leaking personal documents of his health history to the public, working allegedly with a journalist named Karen Morn. In simple English, President Cyril Ramaphosa, represented by Ms. Nwako Manenche, is in court to stop the private prosecution brought by his predecessor, Jacob Zuma, here represented by Advocate Dalim Pofu, before Deputy Judge President Ronald Sutherland, Justice Edwin Moklateli, and Judge Marcus Senyatsi. Citing from the null prosecution certificate issued by the National Prosecuting Authority represented in court, Mr. Manenje pointed out that nowhere in that certificate was President Ramaphosa's name mentioned to warrant the private prosecution Mr. Zuma had instituted, and that the so-called charge against Mr. Ramaphosa is not a criminal offense. His team is requesting an urgent interdict as the trial will have political implications for the current president. Mr. Mpofu, on his part, who made some concessions, also dealt with the issue of jurisdiction and power of this court to entertain the matter and accused President Cyril Ramaphosa of initially choosing to ignore and criticize court papers. He is also seeking a dismissal of the application with costs. Judgment has been reserved for the 16th of January, and we caught up with the spokesperson of the Jacob Zuma Foundation, Mr. Mzwanele Manyi, on his expectations of the outcome. Will you accept the outcome?
Only if it's lawful. But if it's a cooked outcome, we will not accept. We'll accept an outcome that is in line with the Constitution. What we have here is a situation where we're dealing with a motion court. We're dealing with a civil court that is asked to overturn something that is supposed to be happening in a criminal court. That alone should be an anomaly. You as media should be asking, how is it possible that a civil court can overturn something that is in the timetable of the criminal court? This is absurd. So any outcome here that does not fit the Constitution will definitely not be accepted.
And that outcome from this interdict application by sitting President Cyril Ramaphosa will determine what happens on the 19th, or that case brought against him by former President Jacob Zuma. From the Johannesburg High Court, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
We have more stories on Network Africa. Plus, United Nations appeal for funds to save 30 million malnourished children. Details in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Network Africa. The Constitutional Court in Benin has declared the pro-government parties have won a majority of seats in parliamentary elections. Allies of President Patrice Talon secured 81 seats, while the main opposition party in Benin Republic, that's the Democrats, won 28 seats. It's the first time in 4 years that the opposition will be represented in parliament, as in the last poll, the only parties that were allowed to compete were the ones loyal to President Talon, whose opponents were jailed or exiled at that time. The Democratic Party leader, Eric Honet, also denounced the results, saying the poll was rigged, though without providing evidence. Back here in Nigeria, the federal government, as part of efforts to improve and ensure self-sufficiency of sugar production to meet the needs of the people, has started the implementation of the second phase of the Nigeria Sugar Master Plan, which will run till 2033. With a success recorded in the first phase, the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Sugar Council says the country has been able to reach and surpass its local raw sugar refining capacity and needs to improve. Addressing journalists in Ilorin, the Kwara State capital, the Executive Secretary, National Sugar Development Council, Zak Adedeji, says that there have been a lot of achievements with the first phase, which ended last year.
Going forward, all our activities will be solely driven by research, data, innovation, and modern technology. For us at the Council, the year 2023 is both historic and epochal. 2023 will mark the end of the first phase of Nigeria Sugar Master Plan, which began in 2013, while 2023 will also mark the commencement of the implementation of the phase 2 of the Nigeria Sugar Master Plan, which will run through 2033. So we already have our work cut out for us. We are more determined in our resolve to ensure that the nation's sugar sector serves the interests of Nigeria and Nigerians through increased revenue and job creation for our youth. I wish to, at this point, call on all our partners to redouble their effort, especially as relates to the adoption of modern technology and use of data to drive their activities.
Within the midst of Nigerians.
And as part of efforts to ensure the safety of residents of the FCT, Emergency Management is asking residents to desist from indiscriminate sale of petroleum products around markets and residential areas. Speaking in Maitama at the Maitama Ultra Modern Market in Kubwa, the Director, Forecasting, Response and Mitigation of the agency, Mrs. Florence, says the incidence of fire is rampant during the dry season, and there is a need for traders and residents to avoid acts capable of causing any form of disaster. The agency also appealed to residents to desist from blocking drains in order to maintain a clean and healthy environment.
You will recall that some time ago there was a fire explosion, kerosene explosion, in this Kubwa village market, and to be specific, at this location. You can see the location where a lady was selling kerosene and there was an explosion. We were here, we carried out the rescue operations, and from time to time we come around to talk to them, to advise them on the do's and don'ts in terms of disasters of different kinds. Specifically within the dry season, we try to discourage them from selling petroleum products in different locations, because such products are supposed to be sold only at the filling stations. But if you look around, you see that we have people selling petroleum products like kerosene, diesel, engine oil, under the high tension wire.
Fund mission chief for Egypt, Ivana Vadgokova, also Holla, has said that the International Monetary Fund stands ready to support Egyptian authorities' economic reforms and efforts to tame inflation. Speaking at a news conference in Washington, D.C., she added that the IMF Group program approved in December supports the authorities' own reform program, which aims at addressing vulnerabilities and promoting sustainable and inclusive growth and job
State-owned
creation.
enterprises and private companies. In December, supports the authorities' own reform program, which aims to address vulnerabilities and promote sustainable and inclusive growth and job creation. It is anchored on three main pillars. First, exchange rate and monetary policies will be focused on a permanent shift to a flexible exchange rate regime that would help absorb external shocks and rebuild reserves while gradually reducing inflation. Second, continued fiscal discipline and fiscal structural policies aim to maintain market confidence and ensure the downward trajectory of the debt-to-GDP ratio while strengthening the budgetary process, increasing transparency, and improving the budget composition so as to allow for an expansion in social spending. Third, a structural reform agenda will help promote private sector investment and secure strong and inclusive medium-term growth, including through reducing the role of the state in generating economic activity, leveling the playing field between state-owned enterprises and private companies, and removing barriers to trade. Let me note that inflation has been a global challenge this year, and Egypt is not an exception. And while we expect inflation to remain elevated during this fiscal year, we do expect it to fall back to around 7% by fiscal year 2024.
The United Nations has launched an appeal for funds to come to the aid before it is too late of 30 million children suffering from acute malnutrition in countries affected by food crisis. The 15 countries affected are Afghanistan, Burkina Faso, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Haiti, Kenya, Madagascar, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, and Yemen.
The call to action is released by the UN organization to ask for greater attention and greater investment to address the dramatic crisis of malnutrition which we are seeing as a result of combination of climate shocks, conflicts, economic downturns, and COVID-19. Which have increased the number of malnourished children. We now have, more than 30 million children who are malnourished. And some of them, at least 8 million, are severely affected. And that increases their risk of death up to 12 times compared to the children who are well nourished. WHO is trying to increase the access to the necessary treatment for the malnourished children, and that means increasing the number, which is now only 2 out of 10 children who receive the adequate treatment. We have been updating the science and the recommendations about how to manage severe acute malnutrition. We've been providing tools, we've been providing training to health workers, and helping the countries with the highest burden who are worst affected to develop scale-up plans.
And that's the final edition of Network Africa for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Wawadu.